You know, it would be pizza time, but this box is empty.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
Spider-Man. 10% spider, 90% man, 240% horrible dancer. Even amongst the ever-increasing popularity of Marvel's gigantic ensemble of great heroes, Spider-Man's always been my personal favorite. From watching the Raimi trilogy during my early to mid-childhood to seeing him alongside the other faces in the MCU, I find the story of your average awkward teenager, Peter Parker, getting bitten by a radioactive spider and growing into our titular hero one of the easiest to connect to for any person of any age group. I love the Raimi trilogy, yes, that does include 3. I love Homecoming, I really enjoyed his appearances in Civil War and Infinity War, and Spectacular Spider-Man is one of my favorite animated shows ever. I don't have a whole lot of experience with the games, though from what I've heard, like the movies, they seem to have their high points and low points. For every Spider-Man 2, there seems to be an amazing Spider-Man 2, both of which coincidentally reflect the quality of their film source material. Regardless, when I heard that a PS4 Spider-Man game was in development by Insomniac of all companies, I got pretty fucking hyped, not gonna lie. As time went on, I only anticipated the game more and more, for reasons that can either be summed up as me just having a lot to say about the game, or a vain attempt to get more people to watch my shit against an algorithm that hates the little guy. Thanks a fucking lot, YouTube. I'ma do a review of this game.
Now, if you take issue with that, you can find all of the fucks I give inside of this pizza box. What the hell is this? I'm at a loss for words.
The game begins with Peter getting word of a police report regarding Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, and also being overdue on rent, but ain't nobody got time for that when they have to take down a crime boss who's figuratively and literally fucking huge. So yeah, enjoy your eviction, dick. The game doesn't waste any time throwing you into the thick of the action. One establishing shot and opening montage is all that you get before you start swinging around and beating up goons. To make a long story short, Spider-Man helps the cops fend off Fisk's men and eventually beats the shit out of the crime lord, where he's promptly arrested, though not before Fisk beats me up a dozen times.
All these years, and you still haven't learned.
You see, I'm really bad at video games.
At first, I thought this was just gonna be some prologue villain encounter that doesn't have too much influence on the rest of the plot, but to my surprise, it actually plays a fairly large role as the original cause of what sets a lot of the game's events in motion. Kingpin getting incarcerated, losing a lot of the influence and power he had over the city, and authorities cleaning up his mess leads to a threat that's even worse called the demons coming to town, triggering a domino effect where more and more shit just keeps going wrong. Let me tell you, by the third act of the game, the situation goes from bad to holy shit, everyone is fucked. You can really feel how dire everything becomes as the main story progresses. What I found most refreshing about the game's story is that it starts its canon at a place you don't typically see other Spider-Man adaptations begin at. You're not gonna find any origin story about Peter first getting his powers, Uncle Ben getting shot for the billionth time, or how all of the villains became the freaks they are, but instead, the story starts off with Peter as an adult who's had his powers for a fairly long time and gotten accustomed to his life as Spider-Man, working in secret with an NYPD officer named Yuri Watanabe, though still falling behind when it comes to his normal life as Peter Parker. That comment I made about him getting evicted wasn't entirely a joke, since that does actually happen in the game. Remember that this is a free country. It is not a rent-free country.
You'll get your rent when you fix this damn door!
Probably doesn't help that working for Otto Octavius pre-Doc Ock transformation, while he loves doing it, doesn't exactly pay the bills. Kinda like how YouTube works. No, I'm not bitter, what are you talking about? Pretty much every other Spider-Man character in the story starts at an unusual spot too. Jameson's long retired from the Daily Bugle and hosts his own radio talk show where he's essentially become the Spider-Man version of Alex Jones, just without any of the physical threats or selling overpriced junk to idiots. Mary Jane actually works as a reporter for the Daily Bugle instead of Peter, who quit prior to the game. They both had a past relationship with each other but broke up. Harry Osborn's gone to Europe, or so they say, and a number of the well-known Spider-Man villains are presently incarcerated. A lot of background information is thrown your way, but thankfully none of it is anything that you need to see on screen to get the full picture. Most of it's common knowledge to the entire population of Earth and most of the extinct life on Mars, so whatever. Leaves more room for the game to actually tell its story without dropping 20 different subplots into the mix. The only character that's really given an in-game origin story is Miles Morales, which I'm fine with since he's not that prominently featured outside of the comics. As you progress through the story and all the big events happen, you learn a lot about what's really going on, and that's a big reason why the plot manages to keep itself interesting. Shit goes pretty fucking deep. Hidden agendas are uncovered, everything that's happened turns out to all be part of a greater scheme, and a couple folks aren't exactly the kind of people that your overly trustworthy behinds thought they were. Though the biggest reason why I feel the story works as well as it does is because of how well written and acted all of the characters are. This game's version of Spider-Man is easily one of the best, retaining the awkward dorkiness of Peter Parker even with him being a grown-up boy, while also acting like the hilarious snarky bastard that Spider-Man is known for being. Seriously, every time he does the whole Spider-Cop shtick, I burst into laughter or have the stupidest grin on my face. I gotta give mad props to Yuri Lowenthal. He pulled Spider-Man off damn near flawlessly. The rest of the cast does a great job too. Every interaction between Peter and one of the side characters feels endearing and genuine. You can tell just how much he and Aunt May care for each other, get an idea of how the relationship he and MJ had didn't exactly work out originally, while still believing that they're gravitating back towards each other now that they've grown up, see the genuine concern and empathy he has toward Miles when tragedy strikes his family, in addition to the bond the two of them grow, and to the admiration and respect he holds for Otto Octavius and Martin Lee, which they seem to return as well. The outstanding chemistry between the characters single-handedly makes the sad moments all the more effective, and a couple characters' transformations into monsters out of desire for revenge all the more tragic and heartbreaking. While not directly connected to any film adaptation of Spider-Man, there's a ton of nods and similarities to all three versions, which is pretty damn cool. In terms of problems, really anything I could say just kinda boils down to minor nitpicks. I remember Shocker showed up at one point in the game, got beaten up a couple times, and then just disappeared from the rest of the plot. He didn't even show up again for the prison break scene. Not exactly sure why he was in the game, honestly. And while this isn't always the case, a few of the stories that show up from the game's side content just come out of left field. Most of them are introduced and branch off the main plot pretty organically, but then a couple like the whole chasing pigeons thing and these clues that Black Cat scatters all across the city just kinda pop into existence.
Again, it's nothing major, just a couple things I found kind of odd. Other than that, the game's story is great on its own, and as an adaptation of the Spider-Man universe, I'd say it's among the best we've ever had.
I remember not too long before Spider-Man came out, there was this big hoopla over the game apparently having been graphically downgraded because of the lack of puddles or something like that. I want to reassure you all that there are indeed puddles in this game. Quite frankly, I'm surprised the internet blew this out of proportion because the internet never overreacts to anything at all.
I mean, just look at what happens every time a new cartoon gets announced. Lots of respectable, insightful responses everywhere.
So, maybe Insomniac removed a bit of unneeded specularity to help keep the game from running like crap, but that really shouldn't be a big deal since the game still looks goddamn amazing. I'd say Spider-Man is really high up among the best looking games in the PS4's library. At a couple points, I had to remind myself that this game was made by Insomniac instead of Naughty Dog, because the level of graphical detail and realism within the motion capture is about on par with that of Uncharted 4 and Lost Legacy. Christ, look look at the stitching on Spidey's outfit. That's some impressive shit, you cannot deny that. The city of Manhattan that comprises the entire overworld is beautifully rendered. Even if it's all the same city, each district of Manhattan does manage to be visually distinct from the others. Examples include the financial district being comprised of towering skyscrapers that reach higher than the rest of the city, and Chinatown containing a large number of Asia-themed landmarks. The whole city looks stunning regardless of whether you look at it during morning, sunset, or nighttime. It feels pretty accurate to the real Manhattan, so mad props for that. Also mad props for the amount of extra polish on display here. Every individual mundane street corner feels authentic, and subsequently gives me the authentic feeling that I might get shot on the street by somebody who has a gun fetish more severe than Dan Schneider's foot fetish. There's a ton of subtle little details, like building interiors being visible through the window, actually being able to see what Spider-Man's webs are sticking to, and the tone of Spider-Man's dialogue changing based on how much energy he's exerting at the moment. These things could have been excluded, and I wouldn't have batted an eye, but their inclusion just shows all the love and enthusiasm the developers had for this project. Every aesthetic decision made based on whatever mood the story's going for at the moment feels appropriate. The gray, rainy weather works effectively as a follow-up to the period of tragedy and mourning. The nighttime setting with various parts of the city and chaos and flames does a spot-on job capturing how dire and horrifying the situation has gotten, and even the game setting the time of day to when the sun is up at the end gives the player a huge sigh of relief after the battle is won. The soundtrack wasn't anything that blew me away, but it does its job well enough. I really dig that calm synth during investigations and sciencey shit, and I adore the triumphant sounding orchestral music that plays as you swing through the city. It gives these moments the kind of cinematic flair that you get from one of the web-swinging scenes in pretty much any of the Spider-Man films. I have encountered the odd glitch a few times where enemies got stuck inside of an object, and other times the random street crimes didn't register that all of the enemies are dead, but that aside, technical aspects in this game are fucking golden.
All that we're missing is something like that one moment with that lady in Spider-Man 3 who kinda just accepted the inevitable.
I'm going to die.
Guys, you just can't have a Spider-Man game without at least one moment like that. Come on!
The two things Spider-Man does most often are dance like a jackass and wash his whites together with his suit. Though since a game based around those two things would probably be really goddamn boring unless it was made by Atlas, instead, the two main things that Spider-Man does in the 2018 game are web swinging and beating dudes up. The general web swinging mechanics are relatively simple. Hold R2 to attach yourself to whatever and swing off of it, X to jump, and X while in the air to web zip and launch yourself to a greater distance. Nothing too taxing to wrap your head around, but it's intuitive, user-friendly, and gets the job done as a method of traveling quick while doing a bunch of fun aerial acrobatics along the way. Let me tell you from first-hand experience that getting as high up as you can, dropping down at about 90 miles per hour, rough estimate, and swinging as close to the street as the game will let you never gets old. It works well whether you're out in the open, maneuvering tight spaces, casually strolling, or in a high adrenaline chase sequence. The overworld you're placed in is relatively large, but you can get your way around pretty quickly with your web swinging, so yee. I usually find the absurd amount of travel time to be the Achilles heel for a number of open world sandbox titles, so I'm happy to see that's not that big of an issue with Spider-Man. You do have the option of fast travel, but I've only used it on occasion since, well, you're Spider-Man. Why wouldn't you want to swing and climb around this massive jungle gym of a city? That's like half the appeal of Spider-Man. The combat of Spider-Man draws a few parallels to the Batman Arkham series with a similar combo and counter system, though it deviates enough from Batman's combat to be strong and unique in its own right. Square is your standard attack, circle is your dodge, triangle is a web pull, and R1 is web shooting. With Spider-Man being a much more agile and acrobatic hero than Batman, this also heavily plays into his fighting style. There's a major emphasis on aerial fighting, often giving you the advantage by making standard goons vulnerable and grounded grounded enemies having a harder time landing a hit on you. Though, of course, this does largely depend on what dipwad you happen to be beating to death. You've got standard idiots, Jabba the Hutt clones, one of the few good things about Iron Man 2, the most annoying bastards on the planet, and probably something else I missed. Every one of the enemies have their own advantages over the others where you need to attack with different strategies. Fat guys need to be webbed to do any damage, sword wielders require you to dodge their attacks before you get an opening to take them down, and the Sable jetpack guys make you pull your hair out. The various different enemy types always do enough to shake up the combat, and it's thankfully a flexible enough fighting system to keep most of the enemy types from being too annoying to take on. Emphasis on most. If I were to suggest something, while not necessarily a criticism, I think it would have been pretty cool if combat was somehow integrated into the wall climbing. If anything, I'd call it a possible suggestion for the sequel that's most definitely going to happen, unless companies decide to do dumb shit, which... yeah, that's not entirely impossible, sadly. Money makes people dumb. The main story of the game lasted me a good 18 hours at a rough estimate, which I'd say for this game is pretty reasonable for what it is. And even then, there's a lot of extra side content that adds even more playtime to it. While a lot of points in the game require you to do some of the side stuff to unlock the next main mission, even just swinging by a couple landmarks and grabbing snapshots will be enough for you to quickly get back to the main story. If we're talking about the quality of the side activities, for the most part, they're pretty good. The research stations are varied and fun, the Taskmaster challenges are a good test of how well you know the game's mechanics, and looking for the landmarks and lifetime supply of backpacks that Peter apparently decided to spread all over Manhattan is a nice distraction that helps better flesh out the world and Peter's character. That said, I feel that a lot of the side content has a tendency to get repetitive fast. Mainly the enemy strongholds spread throughout the city that consist of fighting off wave after wave of enemies over and over and over again. There's no variety with them and no way to really get creative with taking the enemies down, since even if you stealthily take down the first wave, you'll be automatically detected the instant wave 2 starts up.
And if you think that's bad, those random street crimes are my NyQuil supplement.
I get what their purpose is, random events that pop up as you're traveling throughout the city. They're supposed to help reinforce what it's like to be Spider-Man, stopping along the way to a bigger problem to take care of smaller issues before they get too out of hand. I get that. The problem is that there's so damn many throughout the game. This isn't the case with every district, but most of them have 4 different groups causing the crimes. The street crimes count towards your overall completion of the game, and the number of crimes you have to do in each district can total up to 5. For each faction, essentially making the number of crimes you have to do for every district go as high as 20. It adds up pretty notably, and near the end of the game, I spent a lot of time just digging around in a district waiting for one of those crimes to pop up so I could check it off the list. Also, the large amount of crimes you have to stop for 100%ing the game eventually starts showing how limited the variety of those crimes actually is over time. You just keep seeing the same crimes copied and pasted throughout the entire world, and it gets boring. Though if we're talking the worst thing about Spider-Man, the game's stealth, to put it nicely, needs a lot of work. It's dirt simple since avoiding enemies is as easy as hanging out on top of a ledge above their heads. Apparently every enemy in the game has a birth defect where they lack peripheral vision because their FOV seems to be limited to what's directly in front of their faces. It turns every stealth section into a boring game of waiting for one idiot to stray away from the pack so you can pick them off. Doesn't help that your moveset is way too limited to really do stealth effectively. Pro tip, if you're gonna incorporate stealth into your video game, let me crawl or crouch. I seem to have no problem with crawling on walls, the ceiling, or through scripted air vent sequences. So why is the regular, normal, vanilla-ass ground different? And those segments with Miles and MJ that force you to be stealthy can also go die of mesothelioma.
I know, I've been harping on these issues a lot, but I just want to reassure you all that in practice, they're really just footnotes in comparison to everything else the game does right. This is mostly just stuff that I'd like to see tweaked and improved upon in the sequel that's all but guaranteed to happen due to the game's critical and commercial success.
For those of you who weren't paying attention to literally anything I said throughout this video, why are you still here? To that one fucker who just skipped to the end, go eat a dick. These videos take an eternity to make. To everyone else though, if you've got $60 to spare, and also a PS4 because apparently this game ain't allowed to be multi-platform to get more potential audience members, Spider-Man is absolutely worth the investment. It's a fantastic game with a large sandbox that's a ton of fun to roam around in, and the combat throughout the entire runtime remains fast-paced and frantic. On top of that, it's a great adaptation of the Spider-Man mythos with a ton of winks and nods to fans, while still having a lot of original ideas to make it stand on its own. It's not perfect, I feel there's a fair bit of stuff that should be addressed in the eventual follow-up, but with this title, you'll find so much more good than you will bad. For me at least, I'd not only call it one of my favorite games of 2018, but one of the best licensed games I've ever played. I can't really comment on how it stacks against previous Spider-Man games, but general consensus seems to agree that it surpassed the Spider-Man 2 game as the gold standard for these titles. I have limited experience with other Spider-Man titles, but that really didn't affect my experience with this one, and I can't imagine it will for you either.
Regardless of how much previous experience you might have with Spider-Man games, I guarantee you'll have a great time with this one. A great love letter to fans, a good introductory point to non-fans. Can't really ask for much more than that. I hope you all enjoyed watching the video as much as I did making it, and I also hope you all have a lovely day. Thanks for watching.